The first thing I heard that Tuesday morning at precisely 6:47 was not my alarm, but the sound of a woman's voice, sharp and serrated, cutting through the pre-dawn stillness. It was the voice of someone who believed. Volume was a substitute for authority. My wife, Ellen, had already left for her early shift at the courthouse, a fact I was acutely aware of, because the other side of the bed was cold, and the scent of her coffee was a faint, pleasant memory in the kitchen. The voice, however, was coming from our front porch. I moved from the kitchen, my own mug of coffee warming my hands, and stood in the shadows of the hallway that looked out onto our front door as sidelight windows. There, on my porch, stood Karen Miller, president of the Oak Summit Homeowners Association. She was dressed in what I had come to call her uniform of indignation: expensive yoga pants, a fleece vest emblazoned with the HOA logo Shade had custom made, and a visor that did nothing to shade the aggressive certainty in her eyes. She was not alone. Beside her stood a man in greasy coveralls, holding a cordless drill. Karen was pointing a finger not at the door, but at the antique brass lock set and the matching kickplate I'd spent a weekend installing. "I don't see anyone," she said to the man, her voice loud enough for the whole cul-de-sac to hear. "They're probably still asleep. Just do it. We have to make an example. This is a clear violation of Article 7, Section 4. I knew. Article 7, Section 4. I knew the entire governing document, all 112 pages of it, better than she did. I had a fully indexed, cross-referenced, and annotated copy in my study. Article 7, Section 4 pertained to the standardized color of exterior paint. It had absolutely nothing to do with door hardware." The man in coveralls looked uneasy. He glanced at my door, then back at Karen. "Mom? Are you sure?" "I do not usually do this without a work order signed by the homeowner. I am the authority here," she snapped, puffing out her chest. "I am the president of this HOA, and this homeowner is in violation. The fines have been ignored, so we are moving to the next step: remediation. The community standard is brushed nickel. That a thing is a gaudy monstrosity. Remove it." As she handed him a cheap, shrink-wrapped lock set from Home Depot, its brushed nickel finish looking dull and lifeless in the morning light. The man hesitated, the drill hanging from his hand like a dead weight. This was my cue. I did not open the door. I did not shout. I took out my phone, ensured the timestamp feature was active on the camera, and began recording through the sidelight window. I framed the shot carefully to include Karen, the handyman, my house number, and the offending brass lock set. Her voice was perfectly audible. Her instructions were clear. Trespass was undeniable. "Just do it," she commanded again, her voice rising in frustration. "Are you going to get paid or not?" That was when the unexpected happened. The door swung open. But it was not me standing there. It was Ellen. She must have forgotten a file and circled back. She was still in her scrubs, the pale blue fabric a stark contrast to Karena's aggressive athleisure wear. She had a tote bag over her shoulder and an expression of tired confusion on her face. She was a law clerk for a federal judge, and her days started before the sun and ended long after it had set. The scrubs were her pre-commute, pre-courtroom attire, uniform. For wading through mountains of legal briefs, Karena's eyes widened. First in surprise, then in triumph. Well, look who's home. Finally decided to face the music, have you? She didn't know Ellen. To Karen, she was just some anonymous woman, a target of opportunity. Ellen blinked, taking in the scene. A furious woman, a man with a drill, and her own front door about to be vandalized. "How can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with the weariness of someone who had already been working for 2 hours. "I am Karen Miller, president of the HOA, she announced, as if presenting her credentials at court. And your husband has ignored 30 days of violation notices for this unapproved hardware. We have a standard to maintain. This is a covenanted community. Your lock is being replaced and the cost plus a $200 non-compliance penalty will be added to your account. Ellen stared at her. She looked from Karen's furious face to the cheap lock set in her hand, then to the man with the drill. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was the look of a legal professional identifying a fatal procedural error. It was the look of a chef spotting a fly in the soup. You are on my property, Ellen said, her voice dropping a full octave. It was the tone she used when cross-examining a witness who was lying badly. You are instructing this man to damage my home. You have cited a non-existent violation of a covenant that does not apply. You have just on camera admitted to attempted criminal mischief, trespass, and conspiracy to commit the same. The man with the drill is your co-conspirator. I watched through the window as Karen's face went from confident to confused. "Oh, what camera?" she stammered. Ellen didn't answer. She just looked at the handyman. Sir," she said, her voice now softening slightly, a tactic I recognized. This woman is asking you to commit a crime. If you place that drill on my door, you will be a party to that crime. My husband and I will pursue charges against you personally. We will also file a complaint with the State Contractor Licensing Board. We will seek to have your bond revoked. Is whatever she's paying you worth your livelihood? The handyman's eyes went wide. He dropped the drill as if it had suddenly become red hot. It clattered on the concrete porch. He took a step back, then another. Aim? Sorry, Mom. I didn't know. She said it was all official. He turned and practically ran to his rusted white van, not even looking back. Karen was left standing alone, the cheap brushed nickel lock set still in her hand. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She looked at Ellen, who stood there unmoved, a small woman in pale blue scrubs holding the line against chaos. You will regret this. Karen hissed. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will bury you in fines. I will have a lien on this house by Friday. And that's when I finally stepped out, my coffee still in hand. I stood next to my wife, put a hand on her shoulder, and looked directly at Karen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. She has no idea, I said quietly to Ellen, but loud enough for Karen to hear. She has no idea that she just threatened the wife of a retired litigator. On camera, while attempting to have our house vandalized. I looked at Karen, whose face had now gone completely pale. Have no idea how meticulously I keep my receipts. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain how we got here. It did not start with a lock set. It never does. It starts small. It starts with a misplaced sense of authority and a community that is too tired, or too scared, to push back. I am, or was, a lawyer. For 35 years, I worked in corporate litigation. Specifically, I handled contract disputes and regulatory compliance for a multinational engineering firm. My job was not glamorous. It was not about dramatic courtroom speeches. It was about paper. It was about reading 10,000-page contracts to find the one misplaced comma that could save the company $100 million. It was about documenting every meeting, every phone call, every decision, so that when a dispute inevitably arose 2 years later, I could produce a file 3 feet thick that proved our position beyond any shadow of a doubt. My entire professional life was built on the principle that the person with the best records wins. I was very, very good at my job. When I retired, Ellen and I bought this house in Oak Summit. It was supposed to be our quiet place, a leafy, placid suburb where the biggest drama was, whose turn it was to host the book club. For the first 2 years, it was exactly that. I built a workshop in the garage. Ellen planted a garden. We got to know our neighbors. Life was orderly. Then, 3 years ago, the previous HOA president, a mild-mannered retired accountant named George, moved away to be closer to his grandchildren. An election was held. Nobody wanted the job. It was a thankless, unpaid position that involved reminding people to bring in their trash cans. That is when Karen Miller saw her opening. Karen and her husband had moved in a year before. They were loud. Their parties went late. And says, they had an enormous boat that they parked on the street for weeks at a time, in clear violation of the covenants. But Karen was charismatic, in a steamroller sort of way. She talked a big game about our restoring property value and enforcing the rules to protect our investment. At the sparsely attended election meeting, she nominated herself. No one ran against her. People were just relieved someone was willing to do it. It was the last time anyone in Oak Summit felt relieved about Karen Miller. Her reign began quietly, a few friendly reminder notes about lawn maintenance. Then the notes became less friendly. They became formal notices of violation, printed on a letterhead she designed herself, complete with a faux Gothic crest that looked like something from a fantasy novel. Fines started appearing. $10 for leaving a recycling bin out past 6 Post Meridian, $25 for a basketball hoop being visible from the street, $50 for seasonal decorations being left up more than 10 days past the holiday. The fines were small enough that most people just paid them to make the problem go away. It was easier than arguing. I knew this because I was one of them. In the first year of her presidency, I received a notice. My lawn, which I mowed myself every Saturday, had apparently exceeded the maximum allowable height of 4 inches in a small patch near the mailbox. A photograph was included as evidence, complete with a ruler stuck in the grass. The fine was $15. I could have fought it. I could have pointed out the ruler was tilted, that the angle of the photograph was deceptive. I could have argued that the covenants specified unkempt lawns, a subjective standard, and did not specify a maximum blade height. I could have done all of that. Instead, I wrote a check for $15 and mailed it to the HOA. And I kept a copy of the check. I also kept the violation notice and the photograph. I put them in a new manila folder. On the tab I wrote, simply, Akata, this was the beginning of the file. It was a professional habit, an instinct I couldn't turn off. When you deal with unreasonable people, you don't argue. You document. You build a record. You let them talk while you take notes. You let them build their own cage, bar by bar. And you keep the receipts for every piece of steel. Over the next 2 years, the folder grew thick. I never received another violation myself. I learned to be meticulously, almost absurdly compliant. My trash cans were in by 5. My lawn was a perfect 3.5 inches. But I watched. I listened. Our next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a widower in his 80s, was fined $100 because the paint on his mailbox post was flaking. He was on a fixed income, and he spent a whole weekend sanding and repainting it himself. Another family, the Garcias, were fined monthly because their Sonas treehouse was technically a secondary structure that had not been approved by the Architectural Review Committee. A committee of one. Karen. She held the monthly HOA meetings in the community clubhouse, which she ran like her own personal throne room. She would sit at the head of the table, flanked by the other 2 board members she had handpicked, a sycophant named Brenda and a perpetually confused man named Gary, who just seemed to agree with whatever Karen said last. Karen would read out a list of new violations and fines, her voice filled with grim satisfaction. People would try to argue. She would shut them down, citing sections and articles of the covenants that, as I knew from my own reading, were either misinterpreted or outright fabricated. She was a master of the procedural ambush. She would wait until someone got emotional, then declare them out of order and move on. I attended every meeting. I never spoke. I sat in the back with a small notebook, and I took notes. I recorded the date, the time, the attendees, and a summary of the proceedings. When Karen claimed the board voted unanimously to approve the new fine schedule, I noted that no vote was actually taken. She had simply declared it so. When she presented the budget, I noted that the line item for a legal and administrative FISA had tripled, with no explanation or supporting documents. The folder in my study became a cabinet drawer. I had copies of every newsletter she sent out, filled with passive-aggressive reminders and thinly veiled threats. I had printouts of emails from other neighbors, forwarded to me in secret, asking for advice they were too scared to ask for publicly. Mr. Henderson gave me the receipts for his paint and sandpaper, along with the violation notice. The Garcias gave me a copy of the original plat survey for their property, showing the treehouse was well within their lot lines and not in any shared space. I kept it all on paper. The brass lock set was my quiet protest. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, a replica of a 19th-century design that I had bought from a specialty hardware maker in Vermont. It was my house, my door. Ellen loved it. She said it looked distinguished. I knew with absolute certainty that it violated no part of the HOA covenants. The document was very specific about things like fences, sheds, and paint colors. It was completely silent on the subject of doorknobs. This was a deliberate choice on my part. I was creating a test case. I was setting a single, solid piece of bait, and I knew Karena's appetite for control was too voracious for her to ignore it. She did not disappoint. The first notice arrived a week after I installed it. A violation. Non-compliant exterior hardware. The fine was $50. I did not pay it. Instead, I sent a polite, formal email to the official HOA address. I asked which specific article, section, and subsection of the governing documents the hardware violated. I requested a copy of the Architectural Review Committee's published standards for door hardware. I CAD my personal email address to have a time-stamped record of the sending. I received no reply. 2 weeks later, a second notice arrived. A second violation notice. Non-compliant exterior hardware fine. $100. Failure to comply will result in further penalties. I sent another email, this time via certified mail. Return receipt requested. The green signature card came back a week later, signed by K. Miller. Again, I asked for the specific rule I was breaking. Again, I received no response other than the escalating notices. This was the paper trail. Her refusal to answer was as much a piece of evidence as a direct admission would be. It demonstrated that her actions were arbitrary and capricious. Those were legal terms, and they were very, very powerful. This brought us to that Tuesday morning. Karen, standing on my porch, her carefully constructed world of petty tyranny about to collide with my carefully constructed world of meticulous documentation. Her threat to bury me in Phoenicia and put a lien on my house was the final piece. She had escalated from a civil dispute over HOA rules to outright criminal threats and attempted property damage. She had no idea how many lines she had just crossed. She had no idea that she hadn't just threatened a homeowner. She had provided the final critical element I needed to move from defense to offense. She had, in legal terms, delivered the case to me on a silver platter. Or in this case, a cheap, brushed nickel one. After the handyman fled and Karen retreated, her face a thundercloud. Ellen finally turned to me. The adrenaline was fading, and her professional calm was replaced by a weary frustration. "Oh my God, Arthur. Who is that woman?" "That," I said, taking a long, slow sip of my now lukewarm coffee, "is Karen Miller." And she just declared. Wara Ellen slumped against the doorframe. "I have to get to the courthouse. Judge Thompson is hearing motions on the federal racketeering case all morning. I don't have time for this. You go," I told her, putting my arm around her. "You have your work, and now I have mine. Don't worry about this. I will handle it." She looked up at me, a question in her eyes. She knew my history. She knew what I was capable of when it came to a complex, document-heavy fight. "Handle it how?" she asked. "Are you going to be okay?" I smiled, a real smile. For the first time in 3 years of quiet observation, I felt a familiar sense of purpose, a calm clarity settling over me. It was the feeling I used to get when a junior associate would dump a seemingly impossible case on my desk. The feeling of a complex puzzle waiting to be solved. "I'm going to be fine," I said. "I'm going to go back to my desk and get to work." And I did. The first thing I did was not to call a lawyer or the police. The first thing I did was sit down at my desk and write a new, formal letter. This was not an email. This was on heavy bond paper, printed from my laser printer. It was addressed to the Oak Summit Homeowners Association Board of Directors, care of Karen Miller, President; Brenda Hoskins, Vice President; Gary Slate, Treasurer. The letter was a masterpiece of polite, understated menace. I began by recounting the events of the morning, referencing the exact time and date. I noted the presence of the handyman and the specific instructions given by Mr. Miller. I referred to my wife by her full name and noted her profession as a judicial law clerk for the United States District Court, a small detail I was sure would not be lost on anyone who bothered to read the letter carefully. I then formally requested, pursuant to the Statasa's laws governing homeowners associations, a complete copy of the HOA's financial records for the past 3 years, including all bank statements, budgets, and a detailed ledger of all expenditures. I requested all minutes from all board meetings held during the same period. I requested a copy of the HOA's current insurance policy, and I requested, once again, the specific, written rule that my brass lock set violated. I gave them 10 business days to comply, as required by state statute. I concluded the letter by stating, "Be advised that any failure to produce these documents within the legally mandated time frame will result in immediate legal action to compel their production at the HOA's expense. Furthermore, please be advised that the events of this morning, including attempted criminal mischief and verbal threats, have been fully documented. We reserve all rights to pursue any and all available legal remedies, both civil and criminal. This letter is a formal notice of a pending dispute. Please forward a copy to your insurance carrier immediately, as failure to do so may jeopardize your coverage." I printed 3 copies. I sent one via certified mail, return, receipt requested, to the HOA official post office box. I sent a second copy via FedEx with signature confirmation to Karen Miller's home address. The third copy I kept for my file, along with the postal and FedEx receipts. The paper trail was now growing exponentially. Every action I took was designed to be a piece of evidence. Every non-action on her part would become another. While I waited for the 10 days to elapse, I began the second phase of my plan. I pulled out the AKARENA file, which now occupied an entire drawer of my filing cabinet. I spread the contents out on my large desk, the violation notices, the canceled checks, the newsletters, the emails from neighbors, my own meticulous notes from the HOA meetings, It was a chaotic mess of pettiness and abuse of power. My job was to turn it into a coherent, irrefutable narrative. I spent the next 2 days doing what I had done for 35 years. I organized, I collated, I cross-referenced. I created a timeline of Karena's presidency, from the first friendly notes to the morning's attempted vandalism. I created a separate file for each instance of overreach I had documented. Mr. Henderson's mailbox. The Garciasa treehouse. The ever-expanding budget for legal and administrative fees. I noticed a pattern. The fines were always for small, subjective violations that were difficult to disprove. The targets were often the elderly, families with young children, or people who I suspected did not speak English as their first language. The people least likely to fight back. My case was different. I was not an easy target, and by pushing me, she had made a critical error. She had assumed I was like everyone else. She had no idea that my entire life had been training for a fight like this. On the third day, I turned my attention to the HOAH's governing documents and the state laws. I spent 8 hours in my study, surrounded by law books I had kept for my practice. I discovered something interesting. Our state had recently passed a new set of laws regarding HOA governance, designed to protect homeowners from exactly this kind of abuse. The laws mandated greater transparency, placed limits on fines, and outlined a clear process for dispute resolution. A process Karen had ignored at every turn. But then I found the bombshell. It was buried in a subsection of the state's property code. It was a detail so small, so technical, that only a lawyer or a very dedicated pedant would ever find it. The law stated that for an HOA to place a lien on a property for unpaid fines, the original notice of the fine must be sent via certified mail. Not first-class mail, certified mail. It was a due process requirement. To ensure the homeowner had definitively received the notice, I went back to my file. I looked at the violation notices I had received for the lock set. Both had come via standard mail. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Henderson. I asked him how he had received the notice about his mailbox. In the regular mail, he said. I called Mr. Garcia, same answer. I felt a cold thrill. I realized that for 3 years Karen had been terrorizing the neighborhood with threats of fines and liens, but she had failed to follow the most basic procedural requirement. Her threats were a house of cards. Every fine she had levied, every threat of a lien she had made against anyone who hadn't been sent a certified letter, was legally unenforceable. She hadn't just been a bad HOA president. She had been an incompetent one. And in my world, incompetence was a far greater sin than malice. Malice is emotional. Incompetence leaves a paper trail a mile wide. My 10 days were almost up. I had received no documents from the HOA. The signed, green card from my certified letter had come back, proving Karen had received it. The FedEx tracking showed the package had been signed for at her home address. Her silence was now a formal, documented refusal to comply with state law. The evening before the deadline, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered. It was Sarah, one of the other board members. The disillusioned insider. Her voice was a nervous whisper. Mr. Thompson? This is Sarah Jenkins from the HOA board. I know who you are, Mrs. Jenkins, I said calmly. I got a copy of your letter, she stammered. Karen is furious. Shay's calling you a troublemaker. She says, you are trying to destroy the community. What I am doing, Mrs. Jenkins, is requesting public documents to which I am legally entitled, I said, my voice level. There was a pause. Then she said, she's not going to give them to you. She shredded your letter at the board meeting. She called it a harassment. She told Gary and Brenda that if they talked to you, she'd have them removed from the board. Thank you for telling me, Sarah, I said. That is very useful information. Or, she said, her voice dropping even lower. She's planning something for the annual meeting. It is next month. She's trying to pass a special assessment, a big one. She says it is for a legal defense visa and a community improvements. But she won't say what the improvements are. She just says the HOA needs a war chest to deal with a litigious residents. I could see the whole strategy laid out in her mind. She was going to use my actions as a pretext to raise a slush fund from the very residents she was terrorizing. Sarah, I said, did the board vote on the special assessment? No, she just announced it. She said she had the authority as president to do it. She does not, I said simply. The covenants require a majority vote of the homeowners for any special assessment over $5,000. Thank you again for this information. You've been very helpful. The next morning, with my 10-day deadline officially passed, I moved to the next phase. I called my old law firm and hired one of the sharpest young litigators in the practice, a woman named Jessica. I did not want to represent myself. It is a fool who has himself for a client. I wanted to be the client, the quiet, aggrieved homeowner. I wanted Jessica to be the professional face of the operation. I met her for lunch and handed her a single 1-inch thick binder. On the cover of the binder was a title, a preliminary findings regarding the governance of the Oak Summit Homeowners Association. Inside, in neatly tabbed sections, was everything. The timeline, the annotated covenants, the state statutes I had highlighted, the copy of my certified letter and Karena's signature on the return receipt, a summary of my conversations with Mr. Henderson and Mr. Garcia, a memo detailing Sarah Jenkinge's phone call, hence purse, and a final section titled A Potential Causes of Action, which listed in excruciating detail every law and bylaw Karen had broken. Breach of fiduciary duty, violations of the state property code, failure to comply with open records laws, and of course, the attempted criminal mischief on my front porch. Jessica, who I had mentored years ago, slowly flipped through the binder. Her eyes, which were usually full of a youthful fire, took on the cold, hard gleam of a predator spotting a wounded animal. She looked up from the binder, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Arthur," she said, "you've gift-wrapped this. This is not a lawsuit. This is a surrender negotiation. What's the goal?" "The goal is not money," I said. "The goal is compliance. I want her removed from the board. I want a full, independent audit of the HOA finances for the last 3 years. I want every fine she levied without proper notification to be declared void and the money refunded. I want a formal, written apology from the board sent to every homeowner. And I want a new election, supervised by a neutral third party." And for you?" she asked. "Me?" I said. "I want her to pay my legal fees. All of them." Jessica closed the binder. Consider it done. 2 days later, Karen Miller was served, not at her home, but at the beginning of the monthly HOA board meeting at the clubhouse. A professional process server walked in, right as she was about to call the meeting to order, and handed her the thick envelope containing the lawsuit. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from Sarah. Karen apparently turned white, then a blotchy red. She looked at the first page, saw the case name Arthur Thompson and Ellen Thompson versus the Oak Summit Homeowners Association, Karen Miller, Brenda Hoskins, and Gary Sladier, immediately declared the meeting canceled. The lawsuit was the legal equivalent of a tactical nuclear strike. It laid out, in 48 pages of cold, hard legal prose, the entire history of her misdeeds. It included sworn affidavits from me, Mr. Henderson, and Mr. Garcia. It cited the statutes she had broken, the duties she had breached, and had asked the court to appoint a receiver to take over the management of the HOA immediately due to gross mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. This was when Karen made her second critical error. Her first was underestimating me. Her second was overestimating her own abilities. Instead of forwarding the lawsuit to the HOAH insurance carrier, as my letter had instructed and as any sane person would do, she decided to handle it herself. She hired a lawyer, a lawyer who, as I later found out from a quick search of the State Bar Association website, specialized in personal injury and DUIs. He was a television ad lawyer, he was cheap, and he was completely out of his depth. His first move was to send Jessica a blustering letter full of typos, accusing me of a vendetta and demanding we withdraw the Afravolosa lawsuit, or he would countersue for defamation. Jessica's response was a single sentence, "We will see you in court." This was when the story took a turn that even I didn't anticipate. Karen, feeling the pressure, decided to go on the offensive. But she did not do it in the courtroom. She did it in the court of public opinion. She called the local news. A reporter and a cameraman appeared in our quiet cul-de-sac. Karen stood in front of her own house, with the Ox Custom logo visible on her vest, and gave a tearful performance. She spoke of a wealthy, retired lawyer who had moved into the neighborhood and was now trying to destroy their peaceful community because he did not want to follow the same rules as everyone else. She held up a picture of my house, with the beautiful brass lock set gleaming. "A toss about standards," she said, her voice thick with fake emotion. "If we let one person do whatever they want, it all falls apart. I am just a volunteer, trying to protect our property values." The news story aired that night. It was a masterpiece of slanted reporting. My side of the story was a single terse, no commenta from Jessica, which was exactly what I had instructed her to say. "You do not try a case in the media. You try it in court." The next day, Karen escalated again. Convinced she had the public on her side, she called the police. She reported me for harassing an HOA official and for creating a public nuisance. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, a police cruiser pulled up to my house. A young officer, his face a careful mask of neutrality, walked up my driveway. Karen was right behind him, a triumphant smirk on her face. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The public humiliation of the man who had dared to question her. I met the officer on the porch. The same porch where this had all started. End quote. Karen stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching. Sir," the officer began. "I am Officer Davies. We received a call about a disturbance." There is no disturbance here, officer," I said calmly. As you can see, it a quiet afternoon." "Ma," the officer called out to Karen. What exactly is the complaint?" Karen marched up the driveway. "Hay's been harassing me. Sending threatening letters. Filing nuisance lawsuits. Hay's a menace. And that lock." She pointed a trembling finger at my door. "That is a flagrant violation. Hay's trying to intimidate me because I'm the HOA president." The officer looked at the lock. He looked at me. He looked at Karen. I could see the weariness in his eyes. He dealt with this kind of nonsense all day. Sir, is this your house?" he asked me. "Just I said, "and is she the HOA president?" "So she claims," I replied. The officer sighed. "Folks, this is a civil matter. It is, between you and your homeowners association. There is nothing for the police to do here." He started to turn away. "Wait," Karen shouted. "He threatened me. It is all in the lawsuit. He's trying to ruin me." The officer stopped. He turned back to me. Sir, did you threaten this woman?" This was a critical moment. A direct question from a law enforcement officer. My answer was now on the record. No. Officer, I did not. Said. My wife and I are the plaintiffs in a civil lawsuit against the HOA and its board members for, among other things, breach of fiduciary duty and violations of state law. Mr. Miller was served with that lawsuit 2 days ago. All our communications have been through our legal counsel. The only threats made in this entire affair were made by Mr. Miller, right here on this porch, on the morning of October 12th, when she threatened to place an illegal lien on our house and to bury us in fines. I saw a flicker of interest in the officer's eyes. I had given him dates, legal terms, specifics. Karen had given him hysterics. Furthermore, officer, I continued, my voice low and steady, Mr. Miller's current actions of calling the police to make a false report in an attempt to intimidate a plaintiff in a pending lawsuit could be construed as witness tampering and obstruction of justice. I would like that noted in your report. I would also like your name and badge number. And I would like to formally request a copy of your body camera footage from this interaction. The officer's whole demeanor changed. He straightened up. He was no longer dealing with a simple neighborhood squabble. He was now a witness in a much larger legal conflict. Karen's face fell. She had brought the police here to be her personal army, and I had just turned them into my evidence-gathering service. Of course, sir, the officer said, his tone now completely professional. He gave me his name and badge number, which I wrote down in the small notebook I had brought with me. He looked at Karen, who was sputtering. Mom, I am going to have to ask you to go home. If you have a complaint, you need to take it up with your lawyer. Do not call 911 for a civil dispute. Again, he turned and walked back to his cruiser. Karen stood frozen on my driveway. She had played her trump card, and it had been taken from her, turned over, and used to cut her own argument to ribbons. She shot me a look of pure, venomous hatred, then turned and stomped back to her house. The police call was the turning point for the community. The story of what happened on my porch spread like wildfire. The sight of Karen, the performative tyrant, being dressed down by a calm, professional police officer emboldened people. My phone started ringing. The first call was from Mr. Henderson. I saw the whole thing from my window. Arthur, he said, his voice stronger than I had ever heard it. That woman is a bully. Whatever you need, you just ask. I'll sign whatever you want me to sign. The next call was from the Garcias, then 2 other families I barely knew. They all had stories. They all had their own little folders of notices and threats. They had all been too afraid to speak up alone, but now they saw a path forward. I told each of them the same thing. Talk to my lawyer. Her name is Jessica. She will help you. A coalition was forming. What had been my personal battle was becoming a community-wide reclamation project. Jessica's office was flooded with calls. She amended our lawsuit to include a dozen other homeowners as co-plaintiffs, turning it from a single dispute into a class action lawsuit. The case against the HOA was now overwhelming. Karen Ye's final desperate move came a week before the annual meeting. Her lawyer, the television ad specialist, filed a motion for an emergency restraining order against me. It was a work of pure fiction. It claimed I was stalking her, that I had threatened her children, that I was a danger to the community. It was a scorched earth tactic designed to paint me as the aggressor before the big meeting. The hearing was scheduled for the next morning. Ellen took the day off work. She didn't say anything, but she showed up at the courthouse with me, wearing not her scrubs, but her most severe black suit. We sat with Jessica in the courtroom gallery, waiting for the judge. Karen was there with her lawyer, sitting across the aisle, occasionally glancing over at us with a look of smug confidence. She thought this was her arena, a public hearing where her performance could win the day. When the judge entered, I saw Karanis' lawyer nudge her. He had no idea. The judge was the Honorable Catherine Thompson, Elena's boss. The judge I had met at a dozen holiday parties and bar association dinners. Judge Thompson saw us in the gallery. A brief, almost imperceptible flicker of surprise crossed her face. She looked at the case file in front of her, then back at us. She immediately stood up. "I will be recusing myself from this matter due to a personal conflict," she announced. "I have a long-standing professional and personal relationship with Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. We will have to find another Judge G." The air went out of Karanis' sails. Her lawyer looked confused. The image she had tried to paint of me as a dangerous stalker had just been publicly contradicted by a federal judge who had acknowledged a personal relationship with me and my wife. We hadn't said a word, and we had already won the day. Hi-ha and Ted. The temporary restraining order was not granted. It was another documented, public failure for Karen. And it was all her own doing. This set the stage for the annual meeting. It was held in the clubhouse, the same room where Karen had held her kangaroo court for 3 years. But this time, the room was different. It was packed. Every seat was taken. People were standing along the walls. Mr. Henderson was in the front row. The Garcias were there with their children. Sarah Jenkins sat not with the board, but with the homeowners. Karen and her 2 remaining board members, Brenda and Gary, sat at the head table looking small and isolated. The HOAH's lawyer, the television ad man, sat beside them, shuffling papers nervously. Jessica and I sat in the front row, directly opposite them. I had a single large accordion file on my lap. Karen began the meeting. Her voice, usually so confident and booming, was thin and reedy. She tried to follow the usual agenda, but the crowd was restless. She attempted to introduce the special assessment for her illegal defense fund. Before she could finish, Jessica stood up a point of order. "Madam President," she said, her voice clear and strong, filling the room. "Under the bylaws, any new business including a special assessment must be submitted in writing to the homeowners at least 30 days prior to the annual meeting. This was not done. Therefore, this item cannot be discussed or voted upon." A murmur went through the crowd. Someone had called Karen out on procedure, and she had no answer. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear. She ignored him. "This is an emergency," she insisted. "We are under attack by a frivolous lawsuit." "A lawsuit," Retta Jessa countered, "on which a judge has already denied your request for a restraining order, and the plaintiffs now number more than 20 families in this room. That is not a frivolous lawsuit, that is a referendum. However, we are not here to debate the lawsuit tonight. We are here for the annual meeting. And the first order of business is the election of the new board AYA. According to the bylaws, the entire board was up for election every 3 years. This was the end of Karena's term. A motion was made from the floor to open nominations. Mr. Henderson, in his strong new voice, nominated me for president. Mr. Garcia seconded it. Then Sarah Jenkins was nominated for vice president. A young accountant who lived down the street was nominated for treasurer. Karen was stunned. She had expected to run unopposed again. She belatedly nominated herself, and a flustered Brenda seconded it. The vote was taken by paper ballot. While the votes were being counted by 2 neutral volunteers, Jessica stood up again. "While we wait," she said, "plaintiffs in the case of Thompson et al. Versus Oak Summit HOA would like to present the board and the homeowners with a settlement offer." She walked to the front and handed a document to Karena's lawyer. He read it, and his face went pale. Jessica turned to the audience. "The offer is simple. 1. The immediate resignation of the current board. 2. A full forensic audit of the Heisei finances by an independent firm, paid for by the HA's insurance. 3. All fines levied in the past 3 years that were not noticed via certified mail are to be declared void, and all money collected refunded to the homeowners. 4. The OX insurance carrier will pay the plaintiff for legal fees. If the board agrees to these terms tonight, the class action lawsuit will be dropped. The room was silent. Everyone was looking at Karen. This was her last stand. Her lawyer was frantically whispering to her, no doubt telling her to take the deal. It was an incredibly generous offer. It let her and the other board members off the hook for personal liability. It put the financial burden on the insurance company where it belonged. Karen stood up. Her face was a mess of conflicting emotions. Rage, humiliation, disbelief. She looked out at the sea of faces, her neighbors, her subjects. They were no longer afraid of her. "Ah," she said, her voice a shrill cry. "Ah, I will not be bullied. I have done nothing wrong. I have worked tirelessly for this community. You are all ungrateful. This is my community. I built it as when I stood up. I had not planned to speak, but I could not let that stand. I opened my accordion file. You built nothing," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the stunned silence. You inherited a community, and you tried to turn it into your own personal fiefdom. I held up the first document. It was a copy of the $15 check I had written 3 years ago. You started with this. A $15 fine for grass that was half an inch too tall. I held up the next document. Then it was Mr. Henderson's mailbox. A $100 fine for a man on a fixed income. I held up the next. Then the Garcia's treehouse, a place for their children to play, which you tried to tear down with phantom rules. I went on like this for 5 minutes. With each new piece of paper, I told another story of her petty tyranny. The fines, the threats, the misinterpretations, the lies. I laid the paper trail out for everyone to see. My final document was the body camera footage request from Officer Davies. And, when you could not win with your own rules, you tried to use the police to intimidate us. When you could not win with the law, you tried to lie to a judge. I looked directly at her. You did not do this for the community. Karen, you did this for yourself. You enjoyed the power. You enjoyed the fear. But you made one mistake. You assumed we were all as weak as you are. I sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. Then one of the volunteers who had been counting ballots came forward. He looked at Karen, then at me. The results are in, he said. For the office of Presidenta Arthur Thompson, 112 votes. Karen Miller, 3 votes. It was over. The room erupted not in cheers, but in a wave of relieved applause. Karen Miller stood for a moment, her face completely blank. The mask was gone. There was nothing behind it. She turned, without a word, and walked out of the clubhouse. Brenda and Gary scurried out after her. Her lawyer, looking utterly defeated, walked over to Jessica. We accept the settlement," he mumbled. The aftermath was swift and decisive. As the new HOA president, my first act was to sign the settlement agreement. The forensic audit revealed what I had long suspected. Karen had been using the HOA funds as her personal slush fund. The legal and administrative fees were mostly payments to herself for services rendered. She had been paying her own cable bill from the HOA account. It was not a huge amount of money, a few $1,000s, over 3 years. But it was enough for a charge of felony embezzlement. The insurance company, furious that she had not notified them of the lawsuit and had hired her own incompetent lawyer, settled the class action immediately, but then sued her personally to recoup their costs. Faced with a criminal investigation and a massive civil lawsuit, the Millers sold their house in a panic at a loss and moved away, I heard they went somewhere in another state, though I never bothered to find out for sure. Her story, for me, was over. Our story, Community A's story, was just beginning. We held new meetings, open and transparent. We rescinded every one of Karana's ridiculous rules. We refunded over $10,000 in illegally levied fines. Mr. Henderson was elected to the new Architectural Review Committee, where his only rule was obey a good neighbor. The Garciasa treehouse was given a formal, retroactive letter of approval, and we threw a neighborhood barbecue in their backyard to celebrate. My life returned to its quiet rhythm. I resigned as HOA president after 1 year, handing the reins over to Sarah Jenkins. The position had served its purpose. Order had been restored. The file cabinet drawer that once held the AKARENA file now holds seed catalogs and woodworking plans. Sometimes I think about Karen. What drove a person to be like that? The need for control. The hunger for a small piece of power in a world where she felt powerless. She was a performer, and when her audience stopped believing in her, she simply ceased to exist. Last Saturday, I installed a new brass handle on our garden gate. It matches the lock set on the front door. Ellen came out while I was polishing it. She put her arm around me and we stood there for a moment, looking at our house, our garden, our quiet street. "A Taz, beautiful Arthur," she said. "A Taz." "Ours," I replied. Not just on paper, not just on a deed filed at the county courthouse, but in a real, tangible way. We had fought for our peace, not with shouting or anger, but with patience, with procedure, and with a deep, abiding belief that, in the end, the truth has more staying power than the loudest lie. The file was closed, the case was won. And the silence was, at long last, truly peaceful.